Thank you for joining the 6th module of the SurveyToGo scripting online training. In this module, we are going to discuss loops, or also called as iterations technique. Iterations are used when you have repeating questionnaire parts, but on a changing context. For example, a chapter containing several questions on several brands in a brand list. Another example is a section where you register the household members and ask the same question again and again for each member, such as name, age, gender, etc. In such cases, the usage of iteration can assist you with reducing the time to build a script, reduce the risk of making mistakes while building it, and reducing the maintenance work that would be required if the questionnaire is changed. An iteration can be implemented for a fixed number of repetitions, for example specifying up to 10 household members, or for a scoped list of items, for example an answer scale of brands where we ask the same set of questions for each brand. Iterations in SurveyToGo are defined on chapters in the script, so the repeating questions should be contained within the chapter that will be iterated. SurveyToGo keeps, for scripting needs, two built-in parameters that represent the context of the current iteration. One is holding the iteration index, so a number, while the other is holding the iteration name, which is relevant when iterating on a scale items. In such a case, if the iteration is on, for example, the second brand in a list, and the brand is Coca-Cola, then the iteration index within the iteration will be 2, while the iteration name will hold Coca-Cola. Iterations include the ability to define an entrance rule that can determine if we enter a specific iteration or not, or at what conditions we will stop the iterations altogether. As questions within an iteration have several appearances, so one for each iteration, and when accessing the answers of such a question, we also need to specify to what iteration number we refer to. So we added an additional set of functions that all end with the iter ending. So for example, we have answer iter that will return the value entered in a single choice numeric or open-ended question within a specific iteration, if that question is contained within an iterated chapter. Similarly, you can find the contains iter, answer choice iter, and so on. As we've made on previous models, we will demonstrate it by looking at a small sample survey. So let's look at the survey and the script. So let's start looking at the questionnaire and let's see how we would implement that in our script using iterations. So the first question asks us how many household members live in the household, and it is defined as a numeric, of course, and the questionnaire instructs us to limit it to a maximum of 10. Then we can see that we have a repeating section, and the questionnaire says repeat A2 to A4 for each of the household members. So for each of the household members, we would need to specify the name, the gender, and the age. So as you can see, this is a classic questionnaire part where you would want to implement iterations on, and within the iteration we would gather the name, gender, and age of each of the household members. In this case, we will be iterating on a fixed number. We will limit it to 10, and let's see how it is scripted in our script. So that is the script that I have created just before the session to demonstrate the iterations technique. That script corresponds to the questionnaire that we are reviewing. So let's see how we built it. So the first question was, how many household members live in the household? Then we have a set of questions that repeat for each of the household members. So the first question is, please enter the household member name. The second one, and that question is an open-ended question. The second question is, please enter the household member gender. It's a single choice with male and female responses. And we have a numeric question that represents the question that asks about the age. If you remember, we were instructed to limit the number of household members to 10, so as you can see in that numeric question, I limited between 1 and 10. And of course, because we speak about household members, so people, we only allow integers. We do not allow decimal numbers here. Now, as I mentioned, iterations are implemented on chapters, where the chapter that we define the iteration on contains the iterating questions. So let's see how we defined the iterations on the household member details chapter. So as you can see, we took the 3 repeating questions and placed them in that chapter. Now, going into the loops tab of the chapter, we defined the chapter to iterate a maximum number of 10, because our maximum number is the maximum allowed household members. But we don't want the chapter to iterate 10 times, so each time that is defined here. So we don't want it to iterate 10 times. We want it to iterate up to the amount of number of people that were mentioned in question number 1. So in this case, we're going to use the ability to define an entrance rule for the iterations. And we've defined it as, if you remember, we have an internal parameter called iteration index that holds the current index of the iteration, the number of the iteration. So in the first iteration, iteration index would be 1. In the second iteration index would be 2. In the third, 3, and so on. So we want the iteration index to run until we reach the number of household members that were defined. So what I defined as iteration entrance rule, I mentioned that I want the iteration index to be smaller or equal to the number of household members. Basically the answer that was given in question A1. So let's try and simulate it basically in our head, and we'll see how it runs in a second. So if we mention that there are 2 household members, then what will happen here? In the first time the chapter is iterated, the iteration index is 1, and 1 is smaller or equal to 2. So the first iteration would enter. The second iteration, the iteration index is 2. So again, iteration index 2 is equals the answer that was given in A1, so to the number of household members, which is 2. So the second iteration would run. In the third iteration, iteration index would be 3. In this case, the entrance rule would not be valid, so the iteration would not enter. And same goes up until the 10th iteration that we run. In this case, we implemented it with the iteration entrance rules. So let's see how it runs. So I've launched the emulator. And the first question that I see is, how many household members live in the household? So I'll mention 2. Please enter the household member name. That's the first person. And I will say Daniel. And gender is male. And the household member age is 44. The second household member is Shaked. And Shaked is female and she's 29. And as you can see, the iteration ran 2 times, corresponding to the household members number that I mentioned on the first question. Let's continue reviewing the questionnaire. So in the questionnaire, we see a connecting part that instructs to display to the surveyor the last household member, a certain instruction that includes the last household member that was mentioned. And it says the last household member that was entered was, and here we need to replace it with the last household member that was entered in that specific interview. And then instructs the surveyor, please ask that person to answer the following questions. So the questions that are gonna come after. So let's see how we script it in the sample script. So you can see that question number 5 corresponds, it's an empty question, it doesn't have answers, it's only displaying information to the surveyor. So if you follow the previous model of the scripting training, then you know by now how to implement dynamic text piping, and that's exactly what we need to do here. We need to replace the placeholder mentioning the name of the last household member that was mentioned in this text. So how we do that? You remember, we do that with the set text format function. We replace the text, the question text of the current question, and what would be the text that we would pipe in? The text would be the answer of the A2 question, which is the name of a household member, but we want the last household member that was mentioned. Which one is the last household member that was mentioned? It corresponds to the number of household members living in the household. So if you mention that there are 5 members, then the 5th is the last person that we've entered. So this is exactly what we're using here to get the name. So I'm using the answer iter function. And why do I use answer iter? Because the name question appears in the iterated chapter, and I need to mention exactly what name I want to get, of which iteration. So I'm using the answer iter function. The answer iter function gets the question that I want to reference within the iterated chapter. In this case, it's A2, which corresponds to the name. And what iteration do I want to get the name of? The iteration number corresponds, as I explained, to the number of household member, which is the answer of question A1. So let's see how that is running. So let's enter 3 household members. Let's say that the name of member 1 is Ofer, and Ofer is the male, is 38 years old. The second household member is Ked. She's a female and she's 28. And the third member is Daniel. Daniel is a male and is 44 years old. Now, what we expect to see in the next question the fact that Daniel is the last one that was mentioned, and Daniel is the one that needs to be asked the following questions of the questionnaire. So that's exactly what you can see here. The dynamic text was entered, and you can see that the placeholders were replaced by the answer that was given to question A2 in the last iteration. I'm going to close the emulator now, and let's move to review additional parts of the questionnaire. So the next part of the questionnaire is asking us about the drink categories that we have bought: coffee, tea, milk, carbonated soft drinks, wine, beer, etc. Then for the ones that we've mentioned that we have bought, there are several questions that are asked on each one of those categories. So the first question is, when was the last time you bought? And then we need to place in the category that we're referring to in that specific context. Where did we last buy the category? And then how much time was spent? How much money was spent on the category in that last time that it was bought? So as you can see, those three questions, A6, A7, and A8, should be repeated for each of the categories that were mentioned in question A5, and it is also clearly indicated on the questionnaire, which is normally the case. So let's see how we script it in the sample script. So the first question that we're entering is the question about the ever buying any of the following categories, and the answers contain a scale of the categories, which are coffee, tea, milk, carbonated soft drinks, wine, beer, and a none. And as you can see, I marked the none as an exclusive answer because I cannot select none and other. We've explained in previous models how this is done. I'll repeat that. Going into the properties of the answer and selecting the exclusive answer attribute. So that was the first thing that I've done. It's a multiple selection question. Then, if you remember, there was three questions that I had to ask about about each category that I mentioned that I ever bought. So the first thing that I did is I took these three questions and I entered them into a chapter, because I can only iterate on a chapter. And the first question in the chapter is, when was the last time you bought? And then I created a placeholder for the category name. Then the next question was, where did you last buy the category name? And the third was, how much did you spend on the category when you last bought it? Then I went into the chapter, and I had to do a few things here. The first thing that I had to do is that I had to create an entrance rule for the entire chapter, which is, if I didn't select any of the categories in 6, so if I selected none, then basically I shouldn't enter the chapter at all. I shouldn't start any iteration, and this is done by that condition. A6 is a multiple selection, so we use the contains function. So if that question didn't contain, so if A6 didn't contain the none, which is the last answer, then only then we enter the chapter. The next thing that I'm doing is I'm defining my iteration. So in that case, I'm going to be iterating on the same scale that I used for A6, which contains the categories. So the iteration is basically going to go one after the other on the brands on the list. And in the first iteration, it would refer to the first brand. On the second iteration, it would take the second brand from the scale. On the third brand from the scale, and so on. additionally, I'm gonna add an iteration entrance rule, which basically determines that I would enter the iteration only if it was mentioned in A6. So I use the function contains, of course, in A6 is a multiple selection. And what do I check if A6 contains? I check about the iteration index, because the iteration index in the first iteration is going to correspond to the first brand, to the first category in my scale. On the second iteration, the iteration index is going to be 2, and it's going to correspond to the second category in my answer scale. So I'm checking that my iteration index, basically 1, 2, 3, and so on, if it was contained as an answer in A6. Now let's see what we do within the iteration. So within the iteration we have the questions. The first question is, when was the last time you bought? And then I kept a placeholder for the category name. And again, you remember that we do dynamic text piping by using the set text format. Now, what are we using in this case as the text to replace? We want to replace the category name. And as I mentioned, aside from the iteration index that corresponds to the number of the item on the answer scale, we also have the iteration name, which holds the text of that scale item. So we take the iteration name and we place it in the placeholder. Same thing we do. For the other questions as well, where we need to replace the placeholder with the actual category name of that specific context in that iteration. So let's see how this is running. I'm gonna start the emulator from that question. I don't need to start from the beginning, because that part doesn't depend on the first part, which is the household member iterating chapter. So I'm just gonna start from that question. So let's start doing the testing. Let's say that we drank coffee, milk, and beer. You can see that if I select the none, it's exclusive, then it deselects all the other. And if I'm clicking on wine and tea, then it would uncheck the none. So I selected that I ever bought a tea and wine. Now, what I'd expect to see is to see a repeating set of 3 questions for each of the categories that I selected. So first I would see them for tea. When was the last time you bought tea? In the past month. Where did you last buy tea? It was in the supermarket. And I think I spent $21. The next iteration is now running about wine. And you can see that the question text was now replaced with, when was the last time you bought wine? And I bought wine in the past 3 months. I bought it in the supermarket as well. And how much did you spend on wine when you last bought it? And I think it was $42. And that basically it. We've seen how you can iterate on a fixed number, like the household members number, or how we iterate on a fixed scale of categories. In this case, we saw where we define the iterations on the loop tab. We saw where we define it for a fixed number of iterations or for a scale. We looked at where we define the iteration entrance rule, and then how we use the iteration index and iteration name to control the logic of each iteration, like replace dynamic text where we need to, like in the categories examples. And we also saw how we use the iter functions. For example, in A5, when we wanted to display the name of the last household member that was mentioned in our household member details iterating chapter, and then we use the answer iter to do that. So this basically concludes our model where we've discussed iterations and showed how this is implemented for certain questionnaires and within the script. One last thing that I want to refer you to is the fact that we have a built-in household sample survey that was created, and you can utilize as a reference when you build your questionnaires and need to create a household section. It can be accessed in the following place on our support portal. So you can see the URL on the top part, and you can see that it is part of our samples template library. It is a sample combined with a short video guide, and you can always refer to it when you build a questionnaire that has a household survey, has a household chapter and section at the beginning of the questionnaire. So thank you for joining this model, and we hope to see you on our upcoming additional models.